There's a story which is brought in the Siches about Moshe Rabbeinu, that the Tzemach Tzedek was asked, I think it was a Shavuos. The Tzemach Tzedek was asked, when the Yam Suf split, when Kriyas Yam Suf occurred, what was Moshe Rabbeinu doing? At the moment of the splitting of the sea, what was Moshe Rabbeinu doing? And the Tzemach Tzedek answered, it is given kalten brand. That was the answer. He was cold brand. Kalten brand means basically hot ice. And the concept is that when the Tzemach Tzedek was saying that when the Yam Suf was split, Moshe stood still, like a statue of marble. You saw no Tnuah Chitzonius, you saw no external demonstration of what was going on inside. And in reality, he was in an incredibly high state of dveikus, of attachedness to Elokus. In other words, he was so in the spirit of the Gili Elokus, which was happening at that moment, that externally you saw nothing. In the Chabad tradition, I guess you could say that the Rebbe that personifies that more than any other would be the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe is famous for his dveikis, and he's famous for the fact that his dveikis had no tnuah. There was no chitzenius dikatnuah. The Rebbe by Fabrengen would often tell, or on occasion told the Vart, that between Minche and Ne'ilah and Yom Kippur, the Mittler Rebbe, in fact, verlegen a hand auf a hand, he would put one hand up at the other and sit still. And he had a spitzik and he put on a streimbel, he had a pointy streimbel, like you see in the picture of the Tzemach Tzedek. It's actually a famous photograph of the Rebbe actually doing this with his hands. Und von spitz streimbel hat gerunnen Schweiß wie a Brunnen. From the tip of the streimbel, sweat, perspiration was pouring like a fountain. Which means that on the outside, his guf demonstrated nothing about what was happening inside. But the moichin, the inyana that it was being mizbanin at that hour was so powerful that he perspired so profusely, even though his body wasn't moving at all. So this is what the Tzemach Tzedek said about Moshe Rabbeinu, the B'shas Kriyas Yam Suf given kalten brand. Now, the issue that I want to share at the opening of tonight's class is this. We know that from the time Moshe Rabbeinu appears in Mitzrayim until the Torah is given and the Mishkan is built is a couple of years. It's a couple of years. 2 years, maybe less, maybe a little more. It's not a lot of time. During those 2 years, Mitzrayim was turned upside down, the world was turned upside down, and there were an extraordinary number of nisim, miracles. And the kind of miracles that are recorded in Tzav, they're written in the Chumash. And the Ramban writes a rule that if a miracle is written in the Chumash, in the Tanakh, and the Chumash, it has to be a nes shalamayla mederach hateva, what he calls a nes nigla, a miracle which breaks nature. A nes nister, a miracle which is concealed and hidden in nature, the Torah does not record. So it was an incredible number of extraordinary events that happened in a very short time. And of course, that kind of a period never really repeats itself afterwards. In the Midbar, the Yidden had miracles for 40 years every day, the Mon and the Be'er Shal Miriam and the Nani Yakovid, which is certainly extraordinary. But those couple of years were very powerful because there was a period of time on this earth where any person who lived near these events, in the Lashon HaPosuk, Yado Mitzrayim Kani Hashem, that it was undeniable that this world has a master, that the Eibishter appeared on this earth and performed so many extraordinary events, like it says in Lashon HaPosuk, L'man Reveis Meisei Beretz Mitzrayim, that you couldn't help but see that the Eibishter is the Balabayas. Now, of course, the reality is, if you will, the frustration is that that's not happening today. It hasn't happened in thousands of years. because the miracles the Eibishter performed during that short little period of time were meant to be an education, were meant to set a precedent, to teach something to the world about the hand of Hashem. But afterwards, the world was meant to go back into a natural order, and people were supposed to not forget what they heard, what they saw themselves, or they heard from their parents, or great-grandparents, or great-grandparents, over many generations. What's recorded in the Torah, that there was this period when the Eibishter performed all of these miracles as a demonstration to the degree of his mastery over this earth, so that we would know today and every day, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and all of history, that even when you don't see miracles, the fact that you don't see the Yad Hashem in such an overt way doesn't mean it's not a balabayas. It means he's giving us space and freedom to make right choices based on that precedent, based on the fact that there was a time when the Eibishter demonstrated Kvayachu, the Eibishter was almost showing off, the Hifla. And since that time, we fall back to those miracles as an inspiration for faith, an inspiration for living a life which is consistent with the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And really, the whole world is meant to learn the lessons from what's written in the beginning of Parsha, Sefer Shmeis, that even when you don't see Hashem now, it's only because he's choosing not to show himself, and he showed himself then to set the stage for humanity to serve him and to make this world a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which of course is going to be culminated when Mashiach comes. And like it says in the Pasuk, Ki meitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim ha'ren neflai, so Mashiach comes, there will again be extraordinary miracles. So it was a very special time. It was an extraordinary time. I don't think this is a complete comparison, but if you were around Lubavitch, if you were in Crown Heights, around the Rebbe, in the end of Memtes, 89, 90, 91, Memtes, Nun and Aleph, Inter and Beis, you also were living in a period where miracles were rolling around. There was such unbelievable nisim and niflois, and of course everything that would happen, the Rebbe would tell us before what was going to happen. And as a consequence, it was so exciting. I don't think it parallels the nisim of Yetzias Mitzrayim, because the nisim of Yetzias Mitzrayim had no achiz and teva whatsoever. And even though the miracles we experienced during our lifetime were no less incredible, right? The collapse of the Soviet Union with no loss of blood, and the Rebbe's predicting it, and the Rebbe's nevuas about it, make it incredible, make it extraordinary. And again, we're talking about something that Eineinu Rov Elezar, you don't have to read about it in the book, you don't have to hear about it from your elders. We, who is my generation, and people even younger than I am, experienced this, but pale, mamish, in our physical lifetimes. It's incredible. Yeah, it's less than 30 years ago, and yet it's difficult even for us to fall back on those miracles and to say, listen, Hinei Zeh Melech HaMashiach Bo was qualified, was impressed upon us in a context of so many nisim and neflois, and yet we struggle with our Amunah Mashiach even such a short period of time afterwards. So think about the idea that for a short period of time, a year or two, or a little bit more, the Eibishter comes into this world and displays, Pasha shows off. And he wants the world to see it. And as I mentioned to you last week also, he was educating Mitzrayim, he was educating Yisrael, he was educating the whole world, and he was really educating all of history. That when you don't see a miracle, you know that yesterday's miracle is speaking to you today. This is Hashem's world. And it's not only Hashem's world when he shows you his hand, it's Hashem's world even when he doesn't show you his hand. You have to just remember that yesterday he showed you his hand. And that's one of the aspects, one of the details of the whole story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of the Exodus, that there was such an incredible array, so many incredible nisim and neflais that are written explicitly in the Chumash. And in Mikri Yitzim and Pshuta, they happen literally and factually on the physical earth. As a Gili Alakus, Hashem was showing, so we should know, and we should learn, and we should remember. Having said that, having said what I just said, that there was a relatively short period of time, 2 years in sum, during which an incredible number of miracles occurred, as a way of completely breaking the false notion that the world and nature have a reality unto themselves, and to demonstrate clearly the whole world belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And like I said, that even when you don't see the Nes, you know you're living in the Eibishter's world. There are differences. Having said that, there are still differences between some miracles and other miracles. The miracles serve many purposes, as I mentioned. They serve the purpose of getting us out of Mitzrayim. They serve the purpose of educating the Egyptians. They serve the purpose of educating the Jewish people. But there are a number of these miracles that served a much deeper purpose. Besides for the purposes that I just discussed, some of these miracles served the purpose of setting up the fusion of God and the world, the coming together, the Eibishter in the world. In other words, it's not only simply about Hashem showing us His hand, educating us, teaching us. It's actually about breaking boundaries, it's breaking barriers, bringing together opposites to set up what will be ultimately Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, which is what our Maamar is about in part. And that this breaking all boundaries and setting up the inyan of Matan Torah is much, much more than Hashem demonstrating, so we should do what He says. It's Hashem demonstrating to set up the idea that through the Torah and through the mitzvahs, we bring God and we reveal godliness in the world itself. In other words, there's a few of these nisim that are in a different category. They're not just a miracle so we should know Hashem. They're a miracle which changes the relationship between the world and the Eibishter. It sets up the idea that the Eibishter made this world, that in this world He should be revealed. And basically there are 4 such events. Like I said, there's many miracles. But there are 4 events that are different. They're different because they were not only about a nes. They were about what Chassidus would call chibur hafchim, bringing together opposites. And the bringing together of opposites sets up the idea that through Torah, mitzvahs, Yiddishkeit, we bring together opposites, elyenim and tachtonim, godliness and worldliness, gashmias and ruchnias, elakus and mitzias, and ultimately make the world and Hashem one and the same thing. What are these 4 events? The first is Makas B'Chedes, the death of the firstborn, which happens at midnight. And it says in Chassidus, and we learned it recently in a Maamar also, in Likutei Torah, that Makas B'Chedes, the death of the firstborn, was not only a makkah, because it was a makkah that actually killed Mitzrayim. It didn't just educate Mitzrayim. But in educating and killing Mitzrayim and educating Mitzrayim, there was this notion of noguf limitzrayim v'rafal Yisrael. It simultaneously punished Egypt and healed the Jewish people. The way Chassidus explains Makas B'Chedes, and why it had to happen precisely at midnight when you bring together 2 opposites, the first half of the night and the second half of the night, because it brought together opposites. It wasn't only destructive, it wasn't only about killing, it was about destroying and healing at the same time. Something happened to the Jewish people at midnight. Besides for the punishing of Egypt, which set up Parei's complete surrender to HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kvayachol, and his willingness to let the Jewish people go, there was also a healing of Klal Yisrael, Nogaf Lemitzrayim, V'rafal Yisrael. And the way it's explained in Maamar Chassidus, anytime you have a Gili Elokus, a divine revelation, which can do 2 opposite things, in this case destroy and build at the same time, it has to be a Keach Atzmus, has to come from a place which can tolerate 2 opposites. And this is what happened at Chatzeis Halayla at midnight, Makas B'Chedes. It wasn't just another miracle, the miracle was a detail. The miracle was only the symptoms, what you saw. But what happened was a Gili Elokus, which brings together 2 opposites. And at that moment, like I said before, it was the Nogaf Lemitzrayim V'rafal Yisrael. That's the first moment. Midnight, Chatzeis Halayla. The second moment is Be'etzam Hayom Hazeh B'Chatzeis Hayom, midday. It says in Sfarim that whenever it says in the Torah Be'etzam Hayom Hazeh, it means 12 o'clock, noon. And at midday, there was the event of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Geulas Klal Yisrael. And I believe I spoke about it relatively recently, could even be in the last Shir. that Yetzias Mitzrayim was not about breaking down the walls of Egypt, cracking the shackles, getting us out of our dungeons and our prisons and our regimen of slavery and so on and so forth. Yetzias Mitzrayim was Nigla Aleim Melech Malcha Amlocha HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Chvei V'Yatzma. Hashem reveals Himself. Uga'alam, and He made us free. He gave us freedom. And we discussed this at length last week, that when Hashem gives us freedom, it's not a question of taking away our master, but it's giving us the will and the wherewithal to be free people. There's a famous word from the Maharal Prague, which Chassidus brings, Rabbi brings it so often, that the reason we make a Pesach Seder today, even in Golus, and even in the worst kinds of Golus, you didn't make a Seder on Pesach, because something happened when the Jewish people left Egypt, which is forever. And that is, a Jew can never be a slave again. A Jew was given a power of freedom when we left Egypt, that before that we were actual slaves, we were real slaves to the Egyptians. And of course the meaning of a slave is not only that somebody else tells us what to do and pushes us around and abuses us and makes us slave for them. The meaning of a word slave is a person who's lost the will and the capability of freedom. He has no idea of self-ownership. In Lashon HaPasuk, ki kaspehu, he becomes the property of another human being, just like goydres, just like an animal, and he has no concept of owning himself, of being free, or knowing what to do with freedom. When you give a slave freedom, the average slave's response is fear, and he runs back to his master, because he doesn't know what to do with freedom. He's never been free in his life. He doesn't know what responsibility means. So the Jews were slaves. And when the Eibusher took us out of Mitzrayim, He gave us freedom. But the freedom that He gave us is an eternal thing. A Jew can never be made a slave. A Jew can be made to work. You can even, God forbid, take a Yid's life. But the basic will to be free, to own self, and to be a malabayis over ourselves, we received at Yetzias Mitzrayim in such a way that it's forever. A Jew is always free. And no matter what you do with him, that basic tendency towards being free and owning himself and taking responsibility for self and so on and so forth never leaves a Yid. This was called Nigla Aleim. Hashem revealed Himself at Chatzeis Hayeh, midday. Melech Macham Lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Chvei V'Yatzma, the Eibusher Himself, Uga'olam, and He gave us freedom, which is very different than taking away our masters. Now, if you know the Chassidus, Tanya chapter 31, the Alter Rebbe mentions the idea of Kibarach Ha'am because it was temporary. The revelation didn't last. So we ran out of Egypt because we experienced the power of freedom. And we ran away from Mitzrayim before that enlightened, transcendent force would pass. And then we'd want to be slaves again. But the event of midday, on the 15th day of Nisan, in the year 2448, was not only about getting the Egyptians to let us go. That was done before. The Egyptians couldn't get us out fast enough. Because it wasn't about taking away our masters, it was about giving us freedom. So again, it says in Chassidus that this event is not about a miracle, it's about a fusion of godliness and worldliness. It's a precursor, it's one of the steps which sets up the inyan of Nesinas HaTeira, when Hashem is going to give us the Teira. And when Hashem is going to give us the Teira, God and world are going to fuse in a real way. The third of these is Kriyas Yamsuf, which is what our Maamar is about, the splitting of the Yamsuf, which I'm going to get back to in a moment. And the last, of course, is Matan Torah itself, when the Eibusher came down on a mountain, and there was the Bittul HaGzeira, Yenim Yedel Tachtenim, Tachtenim Yalolo Al Yenim. The Yidden prepared themselves, Hashem spoke to them directly, and so on and so forth, and He gave us a Torah with mitzvahs, maisias, physical mitzvahs that allow us to fuse world and God. So those are 4 steps of Gilui Elokus that were part of a period of extraordinary miracles. And most of those miracles served the purpose of Ravei Smeiv Seib Eret Mesayim, Hashem demonstrating, Hashem showing off, Hashem showing Himself. But these 4 are deeper. It's more than Hashem showing Himself. This is Hashem joining God and world. Now our Maamar is about Kriyas Yamsuf. And remember, we're learning a Maamar from the Alter Rebbe. Likutei Torah, it's the source, it's the beginning. Since the Alter Rebbe, there have been 7 Rebbes, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe, who've all developed these ideas that you have in this Maamar, and I'm sure that there's many other Maamarim of the Alter Rebbe, also on Kriyas Yamsuf, but this is the one which is printed in Likutei Torah. And you have, of course, the Sharei Emunah from the Mittel Rebbe, which is based, at least in part, on this Maamar and other Maamar like it, which explains Kriyas Yamsuf. So when you learn it in the Alter Rebbe, you're learning it in the first incarnation. In other words, what would happen over the course of the generations is that each Rebbe would enhance our understanding of the concept of Kriyas Yamsuf more. We understand it deeper and better and more edel and so on and so forth. But the Alter Rebbe here is teaching us the Chassidus of Kriyas Yamsuf in a basic way and in a comprehensive way. And what is Kriyas Yamsuf B'Klolus? How do you understand the concept of Kriyas Yamsuf B'Klolus? You understand the concept of Kriyas Yamsuf B'Klolus as the idea of joining together what's called Alma Dis Kasya and Alma Dis Galya, the concealed world and the revealed world. What is the meaning of concealed world and revealed world? The answer, of course, is concealed means concealed from us. There are levels where the light of Hashem is so potent, so strong, so powerful that we cannot experience. From us it's hidden. And if we would experience it, it would be very painful. We would be experiencing the truth, which is very painful, very hurtful. Then there's Alma Dis Galya. Alma Dis Galya is the revealed world. The revealed world means the world which we relate to and we know. And this is a much more gentle world. It's a world we can relate to because it's the Eibishter's chesed, so to speak. So there's a concept in Kabbalah of the fusion of Alma Dis Kasya and Alma Dis Galya. And of course, you would B'Klolus it Yitzir and Bria, and B'Pratius it's Bia and Atzilus. And the idea is that when you join together two worlds, you need a koyach which is higher than both. Think about it. And of course, the mashal, right? What's the mashal for Alma Dis Kasya and Alma Dis Galya? The mashal for Alma Dis Kasya and Alma Dis Galya is the land and the sea, Yabosha and Yom. What do we know about the land? The land is a place where many living creatures that live. And as a rule, apitera, bruim, sheyabosha, nivru min haaretz. If you traverse the earth, whether you're a human being or an animal, your life comes from the earth. But by and large, for the most part, your life comes from the earth and you have to be outside of the earth. God forbid a human being that breathes air gets swallowed up by the earth and he cannot breathe, he cannot live. So we live from the earth, but the nature of our existence is that we have to be separate from our source, which is the earth. And then you have the Yam, the sea, and the Maamar Chassidus always bring the Maamar Chazal, Kol ma sheyesh b'Yabosha yesh b'Yam. These two worlds are parallel. Everything you have in the land, you have in the sea. Everything you have in the sea, you have in the land. When you're talking about the sea, it's exactly the other way around. That when a creature of the sea comes from water, Bruim sheba Yabosha nivru min hamayim, just like Bruim sheba oretz nivru min haaretz. Bruim sheba Yabosha nivru min haaretz, Bruim sheba Yam nivru min hamayim. So if you live in the water, you were created from water itself. And just to complete this thought, and I'm not going to explain this, I'm just going to mention it, that birds, oifes, Rashi says nivru min harkak, which means literally from spit. And the concept is that they're a chibur of mayim and afer. They're created from the land and from the sea. It says in Yishenim, that's why birds have reptilian feet, because they're in some ways like land creation, in some ways like marine creations, water creations. But apiteda, if you live on the land, you're created from the earth. If you live in the water, you're created from the water. But miyad sheperish min hamayim mesim. You take a fish out of water, and it dies. Because in order for a creature of the sea to exist, it has to be within its source. It's very inside the water. So you have two types of creations. One type of creation that comes from its source and must be separate from its source. Because if it's be one with its source, it's gonna die. Another kind of creation, the only way it can exist, it exists within its source. And of course, it's brought in Sfarim, and it's even in some cases. Negiah lahalacha, that the fish are not a chatzitza. When a person tavels in the water, fish and fish bones are not a chatzitza, because there's a shita that which is something that comes from water, is simply organic water. It's lebedik avaser. It's water itself. So you have two realities. You have a world where in order to exist, you have to be separate from your source. And you have a world where in order to exist, you have to be within your source. So what happens by Kriyas Yamsuf? So I mentioned in the previous Shia, there's the two Shitas, whether the land is deluged by water or the sea dries and Yidden are able to walk into the sea on dry land, whether it's B'seich Hayom B'Yabasha or B'Yabasha B'seich Hayom, meaning to say, is it how the water comes onto the dry land, which means that Alma Diskasia joins Alma Disgalia, or how in the water you have dry land, which is Alma Disgalia going into Alma Diskasia. The bottom line is you want to bring together two opposites. What are the two opposites? On the one hand, you should be a creation with your own awareness, with your own cognizance, like a land creation that's separate from a lakus. And you should be in the water, like a fish. And the two opposites are that you should experience godliness with the kind of intimacy as fish experience life in water. And you should experience it as an entity onto yourself, as a separate being, as a land creature relates to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as something which is separate from him. It's called bringing together the hidden world and the revealed world. The world where there's nothing but God. And the world which has to be dafka separate from God have to fuse. That you should be an entity unto yourself. And at the same time know Hashem so intimately like as if you're a fish in the sea. So Chassidus says, the idea of Hafach Yom Le'Yabasha, B'no Yavra B'Ragel, the idea that the land and the sea merge, that we creations of the land walk into the ocean, into the water, and we experience godliness as fish do, just like fish cannot separate from water. A Yid experiences that we can't become separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But on the other hand, you're experiencing it as a creature from the dry land, which means you're aware of your dveikus, and Elokus is an entity unto itself. It's two opposites. If you wanted to use, in other words, fish are very one with water, but they don't have much awareness. Land animals are not so one with the earth, but they have very great self-awareness. Now imagine joining those two, where you have a great self-awareness, and with your self-awareness, you know that you're one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu like a fish in the sea. So according to Chassidus, to bring together two opposites, you have to have a koyach which is higher than both. It can't be the land, because the land precludes the sea. It's the opposite of the sea. It can't be the sea, because the sea is the opposite of the land. Kriyas Yamter brings together these opposites, because it comes from Atzmus, which brings together opposites. So here again is this is the explanation for this idea that Kriyas Yamsuf, which is Hafach Lam Liyabasha, transforming the sea into dry land, or walking in the dry land in the sea, allows for a creation to experience intimately with godliness and at the same time know himself. And of course the point is, this is not only a miracle. To say that the Eibush split the sea so the Egyptians should not get us, it's very simplistic. There's so many other ways this could have happened. It was about Gilui Elokus. It was bringing together opposites. Again, just like you have midnight and you have midday, you have early morning. Bashmedas HaBeker. That the Eibush split the Yamsuf to bring together Amdeskas and Amdesgalia, to bring together two opposites, Barvil and Keach Atzmos, which is a third of the four events which have to do with the bringing the Eibush and the world together, which is what Matan Torah is about. That's the concept of Kriyas Yamsuf. That's the concept of Kriyas Yamsuf. So when Chassidus talks about Kriyas Yamsuf, it's not about saving them from Egypt. It's about bringing together two opposites. We also know that just like when Yidden left Mitzrayim, there was a concept of Kriyas Yamsuf. When Mashiach comes, there's going to be another idea called B'kiyas HaNor. Not only the sea is going to split, the river is going to split. And again, we don't, of course, Ein Mikra Yeitze Midei Pshutei. These are events that are going to happen B'Gashmias, just like they happened B'Gashmias. But the primary idea is not the physical event, but the symbol, what it means. It means Chibur Hafchim, bringing together a higher level of godliness and a lower level of godliness. Now, what we learned last week was that B'kiyas HaNahar is higher than Kriyas HaYam. Splitting the river has to do with Bina in Kabbalah, and splitting the sea has to do with Malchus. And I explained to you last week the idea of an aquifer, right? A system of water which goes from the Tehaim to the Mayan to the Nahar, and that ends up in the Yam, and it's Chayzer Chalila. And splitting the Yam is the lower level, and splitting the Nahar is the higher level. In other words, the event of Kriyas Yamsuf, what happened in 2448, which set up Matan Torah then, is a great revelation of godliness that joins together opposites, but it's a lower level. And the idea of B'kiyas HaNor, which is going to happen when Mashiach comes, which is going to set up the Torah Chadoshim, the new Torah, the Torah on the level of Re'iyah and Tainuk, which is going to be Liyasted Lavei, is a higher Gilui, a higher bringing together of opposites, which breaks the barrier of Nahar, of the river, of Bina. This is what we discussed, and of course, tonight I added much more clarity, much more explanation to this vis-a-vis what we did last week. Now, the mashal has a mashal. Okay, there's a mashal to the mashal. In other words, let's talk about Kriyas Yamsuf first. It's about Kriyas Yamsuf first. What is the Yam? The Yam is a sea. A sea basically means a bowl, a basin that holds water. I talked about it last week. What is the limitation of a basin or a bowl, a Yam? And a lake is a Yam, an ocean is a Yam. Water that's basically stationary is a Yam. Is that the water stays inside the Yam. And if you're inside the water, you have no shortage of life, right? But if you're outside the water, there's a drought, because the Yam holds the water inside of itself and doesn't let the water extend beyond the parameters, beyond the limitations of this Yam. Kriyas Yamsuf means breaking that limitation. That on Eretz, on Yabosha, that the lower level the waters should reach. Kriyas Yamsuf means that the waters that are being contained by the Yam, held back by the Yam, so that what's outside of the Yam shouldn't have it, should reach outside the Yam as well. And Kabbalistically speaking, Yam is Malchus of Atzilus. Outside of the Yam would be Elam Abriya, the lower worlds, our world. And Kriyas Yamsuf means the waters which are being held in the higher world and kept away from what is the lower world should be revealed in the lower world. It's basically the concept of Kriyas Yamsuf, as we discussed at length last week. Yeah? But to this, there's another mashal. And we learned this mashal last week. And I need to explain what we learned last week. Because I was determined to start the Maamar. I was determined to read some of the text. And as a consequence of that, what we learned may not have been fully understood. And I intend, with Hashem's help now, to explain better what it was that we learned last week. This Yam, this sea, is called Dibur. Eisius Hadibur, speech. Malchus of Atzilus, it says in Tikkun Yizeh, we all know it, Malchus Peh, the Eibishter's mouth. And the Yam splitting is also a mashal, obviously, right? The physical splitting of the Yamsuf. And it says in Sfarim, by the way, that when the Yamsuf split, all the Yamim Shabba'ilam split, all the seas in the world split. And it says in Chazal that not just the physical Yamim, but all the way up till Atmos Musa Tzav Baruch Hu. That's when it says in the Medrash that the children pointed with their finger and they said, Zeh Keli Van Veyu, because all and every world there was a Kriyas Yamsuf, there was a splitting of the Yam, so at the level of godliness which is higher, which is normally held away, is revealed in the level of godliness which is lower, which is usually lacking in godliness. And like it says the Lashon the Medrash, Hey Mikirut Tchila, the children recognize the Eibishter because the Eibishter had provided for them Cholov and Dvash when they were born and they were buried under the ground, as we all know the story, which is brought in the Chazal, we mention it in the Haggadah and so on. So Kriyas Yamsuf was the breaking of the Yam, so that godliness could be revealed from a place where godliness is stored, hidden away, to a place which naturally does not have godliness, to bring together opposites in all of Seder Ishtalshalos. And the mashal for this mashal is dibur, is speech. How so? So we're going to have a conversation about speech. We talked about it before, we talked about it last week, but we're going to do it again. And again, we talked about this last week, and I'm repeating it, okay? Tavna the liba the kasva intri, right? The color, the flavor, the subtlety, the nuance of one's heart, you cannot write down. Words are one of the greatest gifts the Eibishter gave us. Words allow us to communicate. Words allow us to remember. Words allow us to share. Words allow us to discuss. Words allow us to explore. Words allow us to question. Words allow us to answer. Words allow us to exchange thoughts and ideas and so on and so forth. Words are incredibly valuable. But words have limitations. The place where you see the limitation of words is when it comes to subtle things, to nuance. Right? If you want to express a sensitive feeling, a sensitive emotion, and you're using words to articulate a feeling that you have, the words can carry your emotions to a degree. But ultimately there's going to be a nuance, a sensitivity that you're experiencing that words cannot carry. It's a basic limitation in words. Words can only carry the carryable aspect of your experience, and there's a fineness which words cannot carry. And it's true of ideas, it's true of feelings, and it's true of the senses as well. When you use words to describe the experience of seeing an awesome sight, so you can be very creative and you can be very graphic in communicating what you saw, but the experience of seeing it cannot be recorded. You cannot compare someone who's going to read your written account of what you saw and what you saw. Because words, as powerful and as useful and as helpful as they are very limiting. And the same is true in intellectual ideas, right? Let's say, right, you're talking about Hashem. You want to understand Hashem. And after you understand Hashem, you want to teach what you understand to somebody else using words. Your words that are used to describe something which is metaphysical, which is acharei hateva, which is non-physical, get stuck because you can communicate so much about the Eibishter using words, but on the final analysis, the nuance, the subtlety, the nimshal, what it is that you want the person to really get, words simply cannot carry it. It's just a limitation in words. And what you hope is that you present it to that person in the kind of way that they come to it on their own. But when they come to it on their own, you didn't give it to them. You simply led them there using words, but words have a basic containment, a basic limitation. So in short, words are very helpful, and words are also very limiting. Words are very helpful because they communicate, but words are very limiting because they cannot communicate what you really think, what you really feel, what you really experience. They can only communicate what's describable. So Malchus, Yam, is compared to Dibur. You have an idea in your head. You communicate that idea to somebody else using words. The way your words carry the idea that is in your head is greatly constrained, very limited, very mitzumtzum. No? How can you possibly give somebody else what you know in your head, what you know in your thought, you know in your film that your word can't carry? The answer is you have to get past words. That the student, the recipient, should not only hear the words, they should get past the words to the spirit of those words. And that's the nimshal, that's the concept of Kriyas Yamsuf. That although the relationship between a higher world and a lower world is through a tzimtzum, and the tzimtzum is called dibur, words, and the words don't allow the nuance, the reichkeit, the richness, the sensitivity that's experienced in the higher world to reach the lower world, Kriyas Yamsuf breaks that limitation that words no longer conceal. Whatever the lumdus is in the mashal of Eisis Adibur, that the words not only reveal what the words can reveal, through those words somehow you have what the words are not carrying. And in order to do this, you have to shatter, you have to break the containment, the limitation of Eisis Adibur. So what's communicated from the higher level to the lower level should be this ruach, should be this spirit, should be this neshama, should be this pnimius, and so on and so forth. So normally there's a yam. Yam means what you have in your thought you can keep to yourself. And then there's a yabosha, what you can share with somebody else, only the spoken word. Kriyas Yamsuf means that what you have in yourself you can share with somebody else. That even though you're using Eisis Adibur, you're transmitting not only what Dibur can carry, but what Machshava knows, the way you know it for yourself. Now in this Maamar, when the Rebbe talked about the limitation of words, he said two levels, right? He said two levels in limitation of words. The first level of limitation of words is the very fact, it's lines 23, 24, and 25 in the Maamar, that words can only carry Chetan Yesat Seichel. A great teacher, well prepared and properly organized, communicates to his students very profoundly. But in the final analysis, what he's giving is only what he can give, what's called Chetan Yesat Seichel, the way he senses it, the way he knows it. He cannot communicate. That's a tzimtzum of Dibur. But the Rebbe said more. There's another tzimtzum of dibur. The other tzimtzum of dibur, he compared to shayres, to hair, which is the idea that sometimes you communicate to somebody else spoken words, and it's only words. Not that the words carry an idea, but they carry the idea to the extent that that idea can be carried by words, but that the words are disconnected from an idea. They're just words. And this is inside line 17 till 21. Now, although the Alter Rebbe doesn't say this, first of all, in Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, in Perek Yud Aleph, Perek Yud Beis, the Alter Rebbe discusses Asara Maamar, how the Eibishter created the world using words. And he says that the chayes, the vitality, the vibrancy of the lower worlds come from the words and the letters themselves, but how these words and these letters are disconnected from any idea altogether. It's a much more profound limit. This second idea is saying not that words carry the chitzenius haseichel, words carry nothing other than what those words mean. Now again, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say this, but in a lot of places in Chassidus, when they talk about this, they use the mashal of Parsa, the idea of a Parsa. Now I'm not going to tell you for sure this is the Alter Rebbe's intent, but I'm nevertheless going to share the idea, perhaps this is the pshat in the Alter Rebbe. If you speak words, your words carry ideas. And we all agree that they can only carry the chitzenius idea, the chitzenius of the idea, not the pnimius of the idea, but still they can carry the chitzenius of the idea, right? You take those words and scramble them. Mix them up. Put them in the wrong order. And not only take the words and scramble them, take the individual words and scramble the letters within those words. What happens then? Not only can the words not reveal the pnimius haseichel, and they can only reveal the chitzenius haseichel, the words reveal nothing. No seichel. Scrambled. Parsa. And according to Kabbalah and Chassidus, between Atzilus and Bria and Malchus, there's a tzimtzum, which is the idea of dibur. And then there's the Parsa, which is the idea of Eisias Bilti Misudarim, that the letters and the words are scrambled, so all you have is the chayes of the letters and the words themselves. So this is a much more severe tzimtzum. The first tzimtzum is that words cannot carry the nuance and subtlety of an idea. The second symptom is that you don't have words b'chlal, you have words as they're split apart, disorganized, reorganized in a meaningless order, and all you have is the meaning of the individual word, or even worse, the meaning of the individual letter. That's a gvaldik tzimtzum. And that's the separation between Alma Diskasya and Alma Disgalia. In the higher world, they experience the Oyer, organized words, ideas. And in the lower world, all they have is individual letters. That's the Einarech, that's the Richel Ke'erech, that's the great disparity, the great distance between Malchus of Atzilus, which is called Yam, and Elam Abriya, which comes from Dibur. What's Kriyas Yamsuf? Violating that criteria, violating that containment, that in the lower world there should be a Gilui of the Eir, which is in Atzilus. First of all, you shouldn't have only Chitzenius HaSeichel, you should have Pnimius HaSeichel. Moreover, you should have Seichel altogether as opposed to Eisias Bilti Misudar. So this is this mashal for Kriyas Yamsuf, right? We all understand that Kriyas Yamsuf is not about saving the Jewish people from Egyptians, although that happened. Kriyas Yamsuf is the third of the four events that have to do with revealing Atzmos, which is Mechaber Hovchen, that brings together two opposites, which sets up the idea of the Torah and what's going to happen when the Torah is revealed in the world. And it's the Chibur that's bringing together of Alma Diskasya and Alma Disgalia. So the simple mashal is the land and the sea. And the idea is that the waters which are in the sea come onto the dry land, and the dry land comes into the sea. You bring together two opposites, so that in the lower worlds you have the same revelation you have in the higher worlds. And the mashal is that you break the limitation of Dibur. Words deliver, words reveal, but words reveal much, much, much less than what they were given. And Kriyas Yamsuf means that whatever they were given is revealed. This is the first idea. Then comes the second idea. And the second idea is going to be when Mashiach comes. And then there's going to be, in addition to Kriyas Yamsuf, Bekiyas HaNohar. Now you must understand that in a certain aspect, and again I spoke about this last week, Nohar and Yam are opposites. Why? Because how is Yam a tzimtzum? How is Yam naturally hiding from the lower worlds? And the answer is because it holds, it keeps it to itself. It doesn't let it through. Nohar is the opposite. You know how Nohar is a tzimtzum? By deluging, by flooding you, by giving you so much. No, how is deluging and flooding giving you so much a concealment? And of course the answer is that the deluge and the flood covers over a nuance and a subtlety which is behind it. So in the case of Yam, the Yam holds back, so the Yabosha doesn't have. And then you have to have Kriyas Yam Suf that the Yabosha should have. And in the case of Nahar, the Nahar gives so much that it covers over the Mayan, the Chokhmah, which is behind it. And Bekiyas HaNahar means that even though the Nahar is giving so much, the Mayan of Chokhmah, the fountain of Chokhmah, should not be lost, even though it's so subtle and so quiet next to the Nahar. So let's talk about this, okay? And I might as well read the few lines that I'm determined to read tonight, which is lines 47, 48, and 49. Read them inside, okay? V'kol zeh inyan kriyas Yam Suf. What we discussed earlier is the splitting of the Yam. And of course, to explain the splitting of the Yam, you have to explain what the Yam is. And we just gave two mishalim for Yam. The first is the idea that the Yam keeps the water inside of itself and doesn't let the water out. And the second mashal is the idea of speech, that speech cannot reveal whatever is put into it. It reveals only chitzenius, and the pnimius remains in the speech. And perhaps it's also eisias bilti misudarim, that all that's being communicated are the words themselves. Shubechinas hadibur ha'elyon, the mashal for Yam is supernal speech, and supernal speech covers over. And kriyas Yam Suf is the hainu shalayalim hadibur va'eisias v'chulu, that even though you're communicating from a higher world to a lower world, so you're using dibur, speech. Through the speech should be carried and conducted not just what speech can carry, but what speech cannot carry, the machshava and the pnimius and so on and so forth. And then the Rebbe says in line 49, the when Mashiach comes, there's going to be again an event of splitting. But the event of splitting, which is going to be when Mashiach comes, is not splitting the Yam, but splitting the Nahar, splitting the river. And again, what's the mashal of a river? The mashal of rivers that's raging. It gives so much. Sounds like a good thing. Because it's giving so much, it covers over what's hidden behind it. Okay? You know, in Tanakh, this is brought Maamar Chassidis. You have the story of Eliyahu Hanavi's Merkava, Eliyahu Hanavi's vision. So there's a lot of Chassidis on it. Yeah, they speak about it in the Maamar of Davening also. This Ruach Rash and Eish. Ruach means a hurricane or a tornado. Rash means an earthquake. And Eish means a volcano, which are incredibly powerful physical forces that are very destructive, but they also serve a purpose and so on and so forth. Now is not the time to discuss the particulars. But they're very, very powerful physical forces that when a person sees, he makes a bracha, shekeiche, gvirasei, malay elam, or eisa ma'isa bereshis, and so on, because they're extraordinary forces. And Eliyahu Hanavi saw these things, his visions in his dream, and they haven't discussed in Chassidus, Bariches in the second chelik of Ayin Beis, where he explains what Ruach means, what Rash means, what Eish means, and he has two levels of Ruach, Rash, and Eish, Ruach, Rash, and Eish in Bia, and Ruach, Rash, and Eish in Atzilus. And basically what it means is that these incredibly powerful physical phenomena, these incredibly powerful physical forces, were a vision in Eliyahu Hanavi's dream to represent godliness, to represent the powers of the Eibishter vis-a-vis his world. And the Pasuk says he saw a Ruach le'beruach Hashem. He saw a Rash le'berash Hashem. He saw a Eish and le'be'eish Hashem. And then it says, V'achrei haruach, I don't know the right order, but after there was all of this demonstration, there was Keil Mamadaka. There was a quiet, imperceptible sound, barely audible sound. And that was the Eibishter. So Eliyahu has this vision. And the vision goes from a lower level to a higher level, from an external level to an internal level, from a demonstrative, powerfully revealed experience to a subtle, nuanced experience. And the Teda says that all the tumult, all the noise was a mashal for the Eibishter, but the Eibishter wasn't there. You know, you have in Tanya Perek Mabez in the Haggoah, right? You walk around in a Chotzar HaMelech, and you see Anosh Mirabim Mishtachim Le'ish Echad. Everybody's bowing down to the king. You have no concept what the king is. You just have a concept of people's honor for the king. But the king is a person. So you see Ruach, you see Eish, you see Rash. So you're experiencing the effect of the demonstrated godliness, But first of all, it's not the emes. It's only the demonstrated godliness. Moreover, it covers over a keld mamadaka. How are you going to hear a quiet, imperceptible voice when you have a raging river? And of course, the nimshal is when there's a gilei elokus, it covers over the etzem of elokus. The revelation of godliness hides the truth of God, the essence of God, the Eibush Dezi is by himself. Like you have in Maamar of Terein Vayeda, which we learned about Hamaru Bezgalus, that you're never closer to the Eibush there than when he turns out all the lights, than the moment of Tzimtzum Arishan. Because the light of the Eibush there covers over the etzem. Just like you're not able to look at the sun, because the sun's light would blind you. And if you could somehow block the sun's light using a screen, you'd be able to look directly into the sun. Similarly, the Oira Laki, the Gilei Elokus, covers over the etzem, and that's the mashal of a nahar. The river is not holding back, faket. The river is giving with a deluge, with a flood. But it's covering over, it's hiding from you the keld mamadaka, the inner quiet voice. And that inner quiet voice is the integrity within a person, which is very important. People can get very passionate about the Eibishter and very emotional about the Eibishter. And when push comes to shove, they don't have what it takes. Other people don't get so passionate, they don't get so emotional, but they're ready for Mesiras Nefesh. Because Mesiras Nefesh is not passion and it's not noise, it's quiescence, it's emes. And the river, the Nahar, which is the river of Bina, covers over the Mayan of Chochmah. This killed Mamadaka, this is Batlas. So Chassidus says Mashiach is going to come, and the Eibishter wants to reveal Pnimi Esatera, right? Muftachanami ite she'asad lefia eid aleya. And he's going to be revealing to them Taimei Teiro Mister Tzvei Neseha Shekenim Meshikas Piu Ketev Nedecham B'yoyin, the thing which is going to stand between us and Seides HaTeira is going to be the Gilui of Teira itself. But Teira itself as a Fafleitzung, as a flood, as a Nahar, as a very powerful force which covers over the Edelkeit and the subtlety which you cannot see. So Chassidus says, based on the Psukim, when Mashiach comes, there's going to be B'kiyas Hana. Hashem breaks the river. He interrupts the raging power of the river, the very powerful experience of Bina, so that you can experience the Nekudah of Chochmah. If a person is a brilliant intellectual and he understands so much, and he's so caught up in his understanding, sometimes he loses sight of the creative aspects of Chochmah, which is Neshama is giving him. The Neshama is whispering. Neshamas don't make noise, we make noise. And the Neshama is whispering to him a new nuance, a new creative aspect, a new inspiration, a new enlightenment, and he doesn't hear it because he's so busy with the tumult. And you have to have Kriyas HaNahar, B'kiyas HaNahar, the splitting of the river. And the mashal for this is Eisias HaMachshava. The mashal for Kriyas Yamsov is Eisias HaDibur. And the mashal for, in other words, Yam is a mashal, right? And Dibur is a mashal to the mashal. Nahar is a mashal. And Machshava is a mashal to the mashal. I'm going to tell you now, this is going to be discussed inside, beginning with line 80. But I'm going to say it all now, and then we're going to learn about Matan Torah, whatever it is. And when we get to it, we will fall back on the fact that we learned it already, if you will. In other words, I'm choosing to present the ideas in my introduction. I started doing this last week, and I'm continuing doing it tonight. And when we learn the material inside, I will say we already learned it. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because the Seder of this Maamar is hard to teach in the order in which it's delivered. Alter Rebbe knows what he's doing, and we know very little about what we're doing, let alone what Alter Rebbe meant. But Torah, he will learn any tzaddik we want to understand. So I'm going to tell you now the mashal of Machshava, and when we learn it in Mitzvah Hashem next time, we're not going to explain it again. We're just going to read it and translate it based on tonight. What do we know about thought? We know about thought that thought is Machshava Meshutetes Tamid. Thought operates all the time, not like speech. That Eis Ledaber Veis Lachshes Medaber, a person can keep quiet. The thought always has to work. Now, what you think is to a great extent at your disposal, is in your control. But that you think you cannot help. Because as the Eibush Shafana mentioned, the Eibush made us human beings that were constantly thinking. And of course, what we think, just like Chacham Mahu Eimer, Chacham Mahu Cheshev, or Eimer Kermin Machshava, like Baruch Shama V'Haya Elam. We're busy with what preoccupies us. We think about all day long what's most important to us. So thought is much more sensitive than speech. Why? Because the spoken word can only carry the chitzenius of a seichel. And the thought word can carry the very substance of the seichel. It's not reaching anybody else except yourself. Thought is you communicating with you. But when you think, you're thinking in the abstract. In other words, you don't have the problem of losing some of the quality of your ideas in the thought process, because the thought is a much better conductor for the fine aspects of ideas than the spoken word of speech is. In other words, in speech, you can't just concern yourself with what you're saying, you have to concern yourself with how it sounds to another, because that's what speech is, you're speaking to another. And in thought, since you're communicating only with yourself, you don't have to have that concern. So thought can carry the pnimius, the nuance of an idea in ways that speech cannot. But thought also has its limitations. What's the limitation of thought? Think about it very, very simply. Have you ever consciously made yourself slow down? You're learning something, you're reading something, you're analyzing something, and you tell yourself, cool it, slow down. And the reason you tell yourself to slow down is because your brain works too fast. You have no order, and you can't go from point A to point B. You have no clarity, you have no comprehension, and you have no conclusions. So you slow yourself down. When you think, which is a person's communication with himself, part of that process is thinking in a way that's constructive, and thinking in a way that's constructive means that you slow yourself down to be able to understand it. And that's the mashal of machshava, that although you think all the time, and although what you think carries the pnimius of an idea, but what you think has to be slow enough for you to communicate with yourself. And in this aspect you are, so to speak, a zulas lagabi, the thought itself. And above thought there's the neshama, a person who can think so fast that he doesn't even notice that he's thinking, because he's in the world of ideas itself. And that's a mashal for the nahar and the mayim which is behind it. Just like in the mashal, the river gives a lot of water, but it covers over its kippei mivrich, its source in the fountain, which is so quiet and so subtle. But that's what the mayim chayim is. That's the living waters, because it's connected to mayim she'ein lehem sof. And the same is true in a person's thought. The thought of a person is very powerful. The thought of the person works all the time. The thought of the person relates to the pnimius of an idea, but the thoughts that a person is busy with cover over the possibility of the neshama, giving them new ideas because they're thinking proactively. And accordingly, there's the concept of Bakiyas HaNohar, cracking the river. It's the same concept on a much higher madreg. And again, the basic idea is that Tzachibur of Alma Deskasi and Alma Desgalya. Now, but then this is in Malchus, this is in Bina. By Kriyas Yamsuf, it was in Malchus, and by Bakiyas HaNohar, the Asid Love, B'meheira Yigola Omen Ken Yiratzon, like the Rebbe says in that Siche, Pashas Chukas. There's going to be a Bakiyas HaNohar as well. Even this barrier that has to do with thought, where I'm involved in a lakus completely, all the time, but in the constrained, limited reality of thought is broken, and I'm relating to nefesh directly. I'm relating to the pus of the nefesh itself, or to the pus of Ein Sof itself. Like the difference between a person who thinks slowly so that he should understand what he's saying, and a person who can think very, very quickly, and yet his ideas are very organized, because he's one with his neshama, with his seichel. And that's the pshat, Bakiyas HaNohar. The river is not hiding, it's giving. Right? Yam hides. Nohar reveals. But in what the Nohar gives, it's covering over the Mayan that's behind it. And Bakiyas HaNohar is cracking that, interrupting that deluge, so you can hear the Kel Mamadaka, you can hear the Mei HaMayan, the Mayim Chayim, which are the source of the Nohar. And in the Mashal, Lim Mashal, this is getting past the Machshava to the Neshama itself. And that's tonight's shir, right? We're at 3 lines. That's all. I'm not going to read any more of the text. We continued the first shir. I think I organized my thoughts in a way which enhances the discussion we had last week considerably. And again, the basic idea that it's chibur al medeskas and al medesgalya, and specifically this is in Malchus and this is in Bina. And one of the ideas which is mentioned, that I'm just going to touch on now, even though it's going to come up later in the Maamar, is as follows: that the Kriyas Yamsuf is splitting into 12, because it's going from Atzilus into Bria. And Bria is divided by 12, 4 times 3. And Bekiyas Hanor is divided up into 7, Shiva and Cholim, because it's going from Bina to the Midas, and there are 7 Midas. And the Rebbe is going to explain in the Maamar because it's happening on a higher level. The splitting into 12 means bringing the Elokus of Atzilus into Bria. And the splitting into 7 means bringing the Elokus of Bina into the Midas of Atzilus, the Helam of Atzilus into the Gili of Atzilus. In Mitzvah Hashem next week, we're going to learn about Torah. And we're going to have 2 Torahs. The Torah, which came after Kriyas Yamsuf historically, and the Torah Chadasha Me'iti Teita, which is going to come after Bekiyas Hanor, which had happened taken from Yad Mamish. And again, to quote that Rambam that the Rebbe brings, Meheri Yigolam, and can you hear it?